Good morning, everyone. Well, welcome to our 25th anniversary celebration and our lecture. I think we all deserve a really wonderful round of applause to think of being here for 25 years. My name is Marilyn Fraser, and I'm the CEO of the Arthur Ashe Institute for Urban Health. And I just think it's just so wonderful for us to come together today to celebrate 25 years. And it speaks to our dedication, it speaks to hard work, it speaks to commitment, it also speaks to the resiliency of you all in terms of being here with us through this journey for the last 25 years. When Arthur founded the Institute, he was founded to address health inequities, and the hallmarks of those were focusing on community engagement, partnership, research and training, informing policy, as well as increasing the number of people of color in the health professions. And he was intentional in the Institute being created here at Suny Downstate Medical Center. We have accomplished a lot over the past years, but we know that there's still a lot to do. But our accomplishments would not have been possible without the hard work of those that laid the foundation for us. I would like to acknowledge our former CEO, Dr. Ruth Brown. I'd also like to thank our former chair of the board, Dr. Edgar Mandeville. They have laid the foundation upon which we build. We would not have been able to do that also without former board members, and I would like to recognize our former president of the board, Dennis Susskind, and thank our staff and our community partners that are all here today. Our program has prepared us to embark on new directions, and as we look forward to expanding the work, we thank you for being along the journey with us. At this time, I'd like to call on Dr. Kathy Powderly, who will bring a few greetings on behalf of her division. This is the division in which Arthur founded the Arthur Ashe Institute for Urban Health.
Good morning. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the John Conley Division of Medical Ethics and Humanities. 25 years ago in our cafeteria, which looked much the same as it does now, Arthur stood and talked about his vision for an Institute of Urban Health and why it should be at Downstate. Arthur came to Downstate and came to know Downstate because of the Reverend Dr. Paul Smith, who was a good friend and also his pastor. And Paul got to know Downstate because of what was then known as the Division of Humanities in Medicine, now the John Conley Division of Medical Ethics and Humanities. Paul and I had done an ethics fellowship, an NEH fellowship together, and we had invited him when we established the division to come and join us as an associate. It's also important, I think, to acknowledge the support of Dr. Richard Schwartz, who just died a few weeks ago. Dick was the provost at the time and a champion for both the division and the Institute. So when Arthur was diagnosed with AIDS, Paul came to us and said, "Tell me about this disease, because I need to support Arthur." And I still remember Arthur coming here sick and frail. He was 2 months before he died, and sitting in the playroom at the little tables in the playroom in pediatrics, talking to the kids about what it was like to be a hospital patient and his 4 IVs, what they were going to go to do in school, what they were going to be when they grew up, and about sports. It's been a real privilege to have a 25-year collaboration with Ruth and with Marilyn and with their colleagues, and to see what they've done to foster Arthur's vision for future healthcare professionals. And I look forward to celebrating with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Powderly. At this time, I'd like to introduce our chair of the board, Mr. Brett Wright.
Good morning, everybody. Morning. Beautiful day. I want to thank you all for being here today. It's hard to believe that 25 years ago, Arthur Ashe stood in this building and had a vision and a mission to end health disparities. someone who had great privilege and great humility would come together into the community to start a mission that we've continued to build on. I think he would be proud of the work that we've done over the last 25 years. That being said, we're in very interesting times. We're energized by what's going on in the world. We're paying attention. We're focused. We believe that expansion of our program is necessary, and we will continue to do that work and make good on the legacy that he started. So with that being said, I'd like to introduce our host, Dr. Wayne Riley, the president of Suny Downstate, and board member, to come up and give a few welcome remarks.
Thank you, Chairman Wright. Good morning. Welcome to State University of New York Health Science Center at Brooklyn, otherwise known as Downstate Medical Center. I have the honor of serving as the 17th president of this great institution. And when I was a candidate for the presidency last fall, I made a presentation in this very room, and some of you were here. And one of the things I said in that presentation, that I was attracted to the opportunity to lead Downstate for a lot of reasons. And one of the key reasons was the Arthur Ashe Institute for Urban Health. I thought it was a fantastic collaboration between two great organizations. It was a collaboration born and birthed by Arthur Ashe here, not in this room, but a few paces away 25 years ago, to really change how we think about health professions, how we think about vulnerable populations, how he thought about his life and his legacy. And so that's why we've been honored for 25 years to be the host institution for the Institute. And you know, I was thinking about the wonderful columns that Mr. Roden has written through the years. I'm an avid reader of the New York Times, and I remember some of those great columns you've written about a number of issues. And I know you'll probably talk about this a little bit in your presentation, but I would suggest to you that Arthur Ashe probably would be in the moment. He would be in the moment now in terms of what's going on, what I believe to be rightful place for professional athletes to voice their concern about the conditions of our country. And I think Arthur would be right there with them, matter of fact, taking a knee. Right. I think he would take a knee on the tennis court as a sign that we have to have a community that's inclusive, that thinks about everybody, no matter their skin color, their sexual orientation, their socioeconomic status, because that's the kind of man he was. He cared deeply about everybody. And he traveled the world using tennis and athletics as a means to build bridges between and among communities. So from my perspective, the Ashe Institute is something that I really treasure my association with now as a board member and as the president of the host institution. I want to salute the staff, Dr. Fraser and her great team. I want to salute the board that I work with. I see Dr. Stocker out there, one of the other key board members who knew Arthur very well. And I want to needle the chairman emeritus of the board, Dr. Eddie Mandeville. I made a very pleasant phone call to him 2 days ago that based on my recommendation, Dr. Mandeville will be awarded the honorary degree Doctor of Science at our May 2018 graduation at Carnegie Hall. So Dr. Stocker and I have been dealing Dr. Square, Doctor. Harriet, you got your hands full, sweetheart. Let me introduce Harriet Mandeville, of course. Harriet, please stand. Eddie's number one. They have been dear friends for years to me, so Harriet, congratulations as well. But to get the program started, I want to thank the panelists and listen to the perspectives, colleagues, that Mr. Roden and Mr. Wright and Dr. Mandeville will provide to you, because, again, the things they will tell you are so relevant to today. that it's somewhat eerie that we're still talking about some of the same issues that Arthur talked about 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 25 years ago when he was near the end of his life. So again, thank you very much, and it's an honor for me to be here today, but also to recognize World AIDS Day. This is an important day around the world where we take stock of how far we've come in the prevention, treatment, and education about HIV. And again, I think Arthur would be thrilled at how much progress we've made to address the disease that ultimately took his life. So thank you for being here.
Okay, so the three of us have discussed what was the best way to honor Arthur's legacy and take note of the 25 years of work. And where we netted out was, or at least where I netted out was, it would be helpful and informative to have a perspective from two folks who knew Arthur from very different angles. Dr. Mandeville, who was responsible for starting the Institute with Arthur from day one and managing it under his chairmanship for 23 years, and passed the torch on to me and all the pressure that comes with it to live up to his standards. So I thought it was really important that Dr. Mandeville participate in this conversation and I be a facilitator to extract some of the conversation and point it in the right way. So thank you for participating in that. To my immediate left is William Roden, Bill Roden, extraordinary writer, columnist, works currently for editor-at-large at Undefeated, which is an ESPN news site that tackles sports, race, and culture. So obviously very fitting. He's written several books on culture and race. The most popular one is The $40 Million Slave, which talks about athletes, which I think is also very apropos for the moment, and the kneeling and everything else that's going on with Colin Kaepernick and social injustice, and the mixed messages that we're receiving out there. So he's been a sports reporter for 30 years or so?
More like 40.
Okay, well, he says 30, so we'll give him that. And happy to call him a friend of the Institute. I was introduced to him by Eddie several years ago. He's been a strong supporter of the work that we do, and I want to thank him for being here today also. So we want to make this interactive. We have a few questions to get things started that I'm going to facilitate, and then we're going to open up the floor to you guys to ask questions, insight. And we see this as sort of a past, present, and future. So we want to address how we got here, some of the stories and color commentary around those ideas, the things that we're doing now, and then ultimately how we can play a bigger role in the future of the Institute and how you may be able to participate in that. So with that being said, I wanted to start the conversation with you, Eddie, and if you could talk a little bit about your connection to Arthur.
I met Arthur in the early 80s, and what struck me about him immediately, relative especially to the Institute, there are a lot of things. We got along on so many different levels, but as regards the I'm sorry. As regards the Institute, which is what we're talking about in health, as an MD, I meet a lot of different people and meet a lot of doctors. Arthur knew more medicine than most non-doctors that I have ever met. And as we got to be friends and talked about a lot of things, I probed that, and it was partly because of his personal illnesses, partly because he lost his mother at an early age, and it was partly because he grew up in the segregated South and had a particular interest in seeing the unbelievable medical disparities that he watched as a kid. And when he moved to New York, he saw that while there were clearly some quantitative and qualitative differences, that there were still those disparities. They were not only racial disparities, they were economic disparities, they were gender disparities, and Arthur was not just about racial situations. I remember clearly at his memorial service here in New York, which was at gender discrimination. At any rate, Arthur was acutely aware of how difficult it is to be sick and not to get the right care, and he was focused on that.
Thank you. Bill, I wanted to ask you, you had a relationship with Arthur, and how did that relationship come about, and give us a little insight?
Yeah, there's so many ways this can go, so I want to stay focused. But really, I met him because of this man here. And I'll always be, by the way, Dr. Riley, Arthur, not only would he have knelt, but he would not have taken the $89 million that the NFL just bribed the players to take. He would not have taken the money. And I think about that every day when I think about him. So, and you talked about this a lot. Whenever stuff happens in the environment we're in, I always think, damn, what would Arthur say? And it was be able to and so one of the things that Eddie did, Eddie and Harriet are my role models. Like, really, I mean, you meet a few, right? And in my business, you meet more people who you don't respect. And when you finally get somebody who you really do, Eddie, first of all, Eddie delivered our child, which is always puts him in the Hall of Fame in my life. But secondly, Eddie introduced me to Arthur. Remember, you invited me over to the house. And I've known Arthur, I've known him as a journalist since I was at Ebony, when he was a tennis player. But one of the things and I tell young kids in my profession, one of the greatest things you can do in your profession is earn people's trust enough that people who you cover will actually talk to you off the record because they trust you. Right. And that's an invaluable insight. And so we are over at Eddie and Harry's house, and Arthur was there. And so after I kind of got over not a lot of people, I meet a lot of people, not a lot of people who I kind of like a tongue-tied around. So it took me about a half hour to relax and just kind of be real. I mean, talk. Right. But after I said, damn, man, I'll talk to you, But after that moment, we had a great relationship around, because Arthur was an activist. And most of the stuff I write about is how can we be free? And how can we use every tool at our disposal to be free? And how can we protest? And Arthur was always frustrated that athletes would just, when money is supposed to be liberating, to a lot of black athletes, money became one more shackle because you didn't want to lose it. So everything you did was about not how can I make money free me, it was how can I not say anything so I keep the money. And his whole thing was tennis players, to Jordan and all this, you don't have to be scared. What are they going to do to you? And so we would talk a lot about that. We talk about he was really into the NCAA and figuring out that. And it was just great to be able to call him and just to call him off the record and say, what do you think about this? And he always had a way of thinking that was ahead of his time. Even this institute was really ahead of his time. He identified it, that our chief problems in underserved neighborhoods are our connection to healthcare and fear of healthcare and being underserved. So this was great. So, and then finally, what he did is that, for me, he wrote a great volume. If you don't have it, he wrote a great 3-volume set called The Hard Road to Glory. And I tell all the people, kids I mentor, say, if you don't have his book, then you're not reading. But it's a 3-volume set called Hard Road to Glory. And he did it precisely the reason he founded this is because he was teaching a course in Florida, and he said he wanted to get a textbook about black history, a real textbook, and he couldn't find one. And so in typical Arthur fashion, he said, well, yeah, he didn't say that, you're encouraged. That's right. He just said, I'm gonna do it. And he commissioned, he wrote this 3-volume set. And so Seth, they wanted to make that into a documentary, but he died before it could be made. So Seth Abraham came to me and he said, well, why don't you be the writer on this project? And that was the first time I wrote a documentary. The documentary I still think is a classic. It's called Journey of the African American Athlete. And it won a Peabody Award. But it was because of that. And when I was working on writing that, I said, wow, this would be really great to turn into a book with available. And so that became $40 Million Slaves. You know, I just have I'm just indebted to Arthur just as a tennis player, as a human being, as an activist, for personally what he's done for me, but just generally how he planted the seed of the future. In other words, it's always about, it's not where you are, but where you're going. Where do you want to be? Where do you want to be in 25 years? Where do you want to be in 30 years? You know. So anyway, that's mine.
And again, anybody who has not read $40 Million Slaves, it's mandatory reading. And you will pick it up if you haven't read it, and you will think it was written 2 days ago.
Right. By the way, speaking of it, the audiobook, the audiobook just came out last month, and that's another story. Anyway, just if you don't want to read, you can listen. But I dictate. What do you call it? I didn't dictate. I narrated. I narrated the book. So.
Cool. Thank you for those thoughts. So the next one's a statement that'll lead to a question. Much has changed over the past years, yet a lot of things remain the same or have gotten worse. Health inequities, deaths from preventable illness, underrepresentation of people of color in the health professions. One of the things that stood out in what you said, though, was activism. Are we doing enough? And when I say we, the folks that have platforms to speak from, whether it's athletes or celebrities, are we doing enough? And if not, what could we be doing? Because I feel like health has not been a sexy topic.
Right.
And how do we create an environment where we can have these real conversations about real issues that can save lives?
You want to take that?
Health is the basis of all of it. That said, we all have a role. Bill and I were talking about the current issue of athletes taking a knee. And there is already some attempts to divert where it started. There are issues having to do with what it's all about. And even people, and I'll mention the name, Richard Schwartz, started to say things like, you know, it's easy. Why is all the pressure on us? And the point is very simple. All of us have a role in this, and it's all multifaceted. We need to support them. We need to help them figure out what the important parts are. We need to, the number of people who don't vote in this country, who need to vote and who suffer from bad policy, is astronomical. So you don't have to be a doctor. You don't have to write books. You need to get involved politically. You need to join your local political organization. You need to knock on doors. You need to vote. You need to get people to vote. There's something that everybody can do, and we all have a role in this. And to put it all on other people, like the athletes, is crazy. We all have a role in this. Every human being. And one of the things that you don't hear, you hear about the sexy things that we do at the Institute. But another part of it is health policy. Health policy makes all the difference in the world. That's politics. That's getting our leaders on track, and we don't have to talk about how off track they are relative to what's going on in Washington and around the country and in the Congress today.
Because you're even thinking, you know, again, a lot of stuff I'll talk about now, I'm filtering through the prism of where I spend most of my time, which is the field of sport and play. And it's just, this thing has emerged to a level that even Jackie Robinson probably could never have anticipated, where young black men and women, particularly men now, are almost the major pillar of sport and culture. And this, I mean, to a level that's unbelievable. I mean, people are listening to what these guys are saying. And what one of Arthur's things was, you know, he formed the Arthur Ashe Athletic Association, which again was ahead of his time because he realized where this thing was going. That from where he was, where everything was segregated, to where now, when you turn on a college football game, college basketball game, pro football game, pro basketball game, it is like almost 99% black. We don't control anything, you know. But he was saying that when it gets to that point, you need to be able to, when you're out there, you need to be able to articulate issues, you know, and that's why he wanted to start in high school, you know. So with this $89 million, for example, that the NFL wants to buy the hush money, well, had there been an Arthur Ashe, somebody, they need...
Well, explain a little bit about, it's such a current affair, I'm not sure everybody's up to speed
Right, because
on,
you're doctors,
on what
so you
happened.
figure on saving money. So essentially, the NFL owners have, you know, you could talk about concussion issues, I'm sure everybody here knows about concussion issues and all that. CTE and all that. It's a serious issue, but none of that stuff has gotten the attention of owners and fans the way this silent protest has gotten the issue, right? They could talk about the brain damage and all that. That has not got any near the attention of Colin Kaepernick taking a knee and say, I'll try. So anyway, so the owners start saying, how do we stop this? Because, you know, most of the fans are white. Almost 99% of the fans of these games are white, and they go to the games because they can escape. You know, they can escape the racism, they all these black guys, but as long as the black guys aren't really bringing attention to their race, it's fine. We can just eat hot dogs and popcorn and all that. But it's when they begin to bring attention to the police violence, the police brutality, the economic inequity, now you go to these fans and say, oh man, geez, can't I escape? So and a lot of them say, well, we're not going. We're going to boycott. So the owners are basically who kill the players in every single labor negotiation, kill them. Now they're saying, listen, what do y'all want? What will it take for you to stop this, to shut up? Well, Kaepernick, who by the way made one mistake, he said he didn't vote. You know, that was a mistake. And that's when Arthur would have been with him and said, man, you can't say that. But anyway, so Kaepernick and a few guys said, wait a minute, this is not about money. This is about morals. But I guess the reason people stay in power, because they are expert in knowing who they can buy out. And so there's this division in the NFL Players Association with DeMaurice Smith, who basically has said, I want no part of this. Well, I'm gonna stay out of this. And the guys who were kind of leaders became this little schism. And a couple guys, Malcolm Jenkins, who at first was kind of out there, they began to box Kaepernick out. They started meeting without him because I think they smelled that there was going to be some kind of, at the end of the rain, there was going to be some money. So they boxed Kaepernick out of it. And so now the owners come in with this 89, we're going to give you, okay, you guys have an issue of social justice. All right, we're going to give $89 million over a period of 7 years to whatever damn programs you got. If you would take it and just stop. And so in an ideal world, you know, they would have been principals. No, we're not, you know, but somebody would have been, and this kind of gets back to, there would have been some people who are doctors, intellectuals, whatever, who would have been saying, listen, this, if there's going to be money, this is what we need it for. We need money for health care, okay? We need money for this, you know, as opposed to, well, we're going to give money for more basketball courts, you know, that kind of stuff. So when I've been to so there's a group of players who said, I'll take the $89 million. And just Malcolm Jenkins today had a statement saying he used to raise his fist before every game. Today he made a statement saying, well, I'm not going to raise my fist anymore. And so there you have it. I mean, that's you know, that's kind of the dilemma that, and I think it's the dilemma that Arthur saw. I mean, what are they going to do to you? What are they going to do to you? Jerry Jones says, any player who deals, I'm going to fire. Now, he said that knowing that they had a bye that week, they were going to play. And he also knew that that was impossible to enforce. Because if 3 guys said, then you're going to bench us all, he's done. You know, but again, that gets into a thing that Arthur says, it's not about your physical stuff, it's the shackles are in your mind. And he was really big on that. It's the shackles, and that's not just athletes, by the way. It's all of us. Most of us just aren't, we just don't want to admit that we're brainwashed and that we're recovering. We're recovering. So anyway.
But you got to stay with it, and those dilemmas will always be with us, and they need active conversation and debate. I can remember at the beginning, and Dennis Susskind might even remember this, when we first started the Institute, one of the first people through the door with a pocket full of money was from Philip Morris. You can't, ethics, you can't make it up. And I mean a lot of money. And it was an active discussion around the board. I said, I can't take that. But these are the dilemmas that we face all the time, and and there were a lot of people who wanted to take that money, and I get it, but it, you know.
But look, and I think obviously there's a moral compass question, right? I think you guys are letting off the athletes a little easy here, in my own opinion, right? I think that the platform that they've been given needs to be put to good use. And there are very few folks who have a platform to speak from.
Right.
We can look at it as abuse of power that's going on right now in the White House. He has a platform, and he's taking it on to say anything he feels like saying, and he gets 30% of the population here in the U.S. to follow the nonsense. In the same sense, we need to force our celebrities and athletes to take a stand for something, and it not just be about money. And when I look at it, I'm saying, what are the organizations? Who can facilitate and organize? The reason why, in my opinion, the president was able to hostily take over the police brutality mission that Colin set up was because there was no organization behind him to really put forth what he was trying to get to.
But now, see, and again, that's why I faulted the Players Association. Because, I mean, I belong to a union. The role of a union, in other words, these are young, they're playing football. They're not, the role of the organization is now to say philosophically, this is what this means, okay? This is what he's nailing, this is what it means, and this is what we're going to do. But the Morris was so, I don't know what the hell you call it, but he just let them out there. Because first of all, it was a labor issue. First of all, it was a labor issue. He tried to frame it as people were framing it as a national anthem issue. It wasn't, it was a labor issue. It was a labor issue. You got a player, and everybody say, we're not hiring you. That's a labor issue. And it should become a labor issue. It says, well, it's about patriotism and the flag and all that. It had nothing to do with patriotism. Here's a guy who was a Super Bowl quarterback, and 32 owners are saying, no, we're going to hire a real guy. We're going to hire a guy who's been out of football for 30 years. We're not hiring you. Okay? That's labor. But instead of the executive director coming out and saying, hey, man, this is a labor issue. We're going to take care of this. He kind of just let them hang out there, and so now, but he did not do what he should have done is say, listen, we're going to frame this protest in a larger philosophical context. And this is going to be how we're going to do this. Well, now he didn't do this, so now you've got this division where they're going to get $89 million, which is going to allow them to come. Trust me, the Players Association is going to get some of that money,
All of it.
But one thing I will push back a little bit is that I was talking to somebody coming in here, a young lady, said, well, I don't really follow sports. You have to. You have to. That's part of the problem with our community. You don't have to know what a microchip is to use a computer or something, but this is where a lot of our young people are. And if you don't understand this plantation industry, how can you even begin to articulate? Now we're talking about all this stuff, and well, what are they talking about? You have to understand. This is where Arthur will tell you that. Arthur was an intellectual, but he understood the power of sports and getting people trivialize sports. But look at where we are now. It is a very powerful institution where a lot of young black folks are, and the whole essence of $40 million slaves, well, just because you got money doesn't mean you have power. You know, and all of us are on a plantation. I mean, actually, I mean, you know, that's what Richard Schwartz was saying. You know, he said, you know, it's easy for you to say, oh, y'all shouldn't play. Well, would you walk away? That's right. You know, would Ken at American Express, okay, why don't you leave that $50 million job? You know, before you start telling people that they shouldn't play, look in the mirror and say, well, I do that? You know, how many of you go to a game, and how many of y'all, when everybody stands to see that, how many of y'all would just sit? How many of you would not sit? Feel it. Take a gander at what that feels like in an arena where everybody says, okay, ladies and gentlemen, stand, take off your hat, and you know, and a lot of people have problems with that, but everybody stands. How many of you would not stand? Try it. Yeah, okay, well, you can raise your hand, but I don't know that. In here, everybody, oh yeah, you know, let's go to Madison Square Garden.
All right.
And then when they say, Yankee Stadium, when they do that, they say, ladies and gentlemen, stand up, take off your hat. And you know when you're listening to this, you say, what the hell am I listening to? But everybody stands. So you have to, when people don't stand, I think we blow it off. That's an act of courage that I just don't think we as, and I think, Eddie, this gets back to what you said, as quote unquote fans. In fact, the book I'm working on is The Ethical Fan. And it's really up to I said, wait a minute, what are we watching here? You know, what are we doing here? And I just don't think enough of us, whether it's in this room or your friends, you watch these things, you watch these games, and you kind of don't know about the industry, kind of don't know where the guys came from, you know, and we just say, yeah, they shouldn't play. So I'm not sure where that kind of.
Well, but I'd like to get it back to what we do here. Right. And I think that standing or not standing, whether you do it or you don't do it, is all of 2 minutes or less than that. But we do have obligations before we got there and when we leave. And there are things like making sure that healthcare is where it should be, that public policy, that you know who your representatives are, that you support them, that you get that there are gender issues, there are issues of other forms of discrimination around that we have to be involved with on a daily basis. Right. And I don't care whether you stand or don't stand. There are things you do before and after that game that are far more important, and we can only use them. And when Richard Sherman says to me, I'm not saying to him, this is what you ought to do or you ought to do, because he has every right to turn around. What did you do yesterday, Mandeville? What did you do for all of us yesterday? Right. And there's not a person in this room that can't do something for the tsunami of nonsense that's going on in Washington. I mean, just think about what's happening with health care in Washington. Just think about the fact that a critical part of that so-called tax bill is to remove the cornerstone of the Affordable Care Act. Just think about that for a minute. And it's about to go through, folks. We should be out there. I'm sorry?
What would Arthur do?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, you could say anything, he's not here, but you know that he would always be on the ethical or moral side of the issue. He would be organizing protests. Because, like you said, this is really a time to protest this stuff. I mean, why do people do things? Because they can get away with it. Because they're not, particularly in an administration, this is all politicians. All politicians. They're looking at votes. They're looking at votes. Why did POTUS 44, 45, why did he take on the NFL, but it's kind of leaving the NBA alone? Because he knows the NBA is surging. It's surging. It's young. It's hip. You know, there's too many votes there. The NFL, because of CTO, is not popular. You can kick the NFL when it's down. But I guess when you ask me what I think Arthur could do, and I'd really be interested in what you thinking, because you're the future. You're the future. Is that how do you organize ethical protests? How do you get lots and lots of people? Because I do my job. I'm busy. You're busy. Everybody's busy. You know, except the people who are trying to dismantle stuff. You know, So how do you get everybody in this room? How can we get 100 people in this room to how do you get people to protest?
And while Brother Brett here talked about Bill and me, Brett Wright is now the chairman of the board of the Arthur Ashe Institute for Urban Health, and I'm going to force him to talk about where we're going. But before that, I'll give you a little brief smile. The only person that's interrupted this so far is my wife, who said, "What would Arthur have done?" And it's an icon in my household. And when you run a department with 240 people like I do at Harlem Hospital, from time to time you got to enforce a little discipline, and sometimes that discipline doesn't look pretty. And I'll mention it to Harriet, and I've gotten to the point where I turn and say, "Harriet, I got to really come down on this dude, so don't ask me what Arthur would have done, because he would have done it a lot more gently than what I have to do tomorrow." At any rate, Brett, where are we going with the Institute?
Well, look, we've been discussing how we can look at the social justice mission. How do we expand our role beyond just the health side of the equation? Because social justice leads to unhealthy communities, and you can't have one without the other. So, as a board and as an organization, we've been talking about it for almost a year and a half or two. And I think that the first piece is to acknowledge that there is a significant issue. We were talking about this before Colin Kaepernick took a knee. There was a swell of racism, and there was a swell of inequity and things that were happening, conversations that were happening that we felt needed to be addressed. Our next step is, how do we institutionalize it? How do we take a small slice of the pie, take it on as an addition to our mission, and make sure that it aligns with, one, everything that the organization stands for, and that we can build the capacity to execute that piece. Discipline is critically important. I think that the reason why we're still here after 25 years is because we've been very focused on a very necessary but small pie of community as it relates to health inequities, right? A lot of folks have come in and taken on big ideas and failed. We have continued in very difficult times to manage our budget, to manage our resources, to continue to put the mission forward. I say that, and then the next piece is, how do we replicate what we're doing? This is not the only community that could benefit from the work that we do. And we've got to figure out how we replicate this work in some model, in some business model and form that allows us to put our footprint, to give them the equity that we've built up and the institutional knowledge that we've built up to do this in other markets. There are so many communities that could benefit from this. I look at social justice and say, that is just the lightning rod, right? The conversation and dialogue that comes out of these lightning rods are the catalyst. And then we have to institutionalize it and make it into a business.
And I was thinking about this. So, you have these, you have NBA teams here, NFL teams here. And invariably, most, particularly the young black guys on those teams, came from communities, underserved communities, where they probably didn't have, remember we talked about myopathy a long time ago, when I was doing stuff on cardiomyopathy, hand gathers and all that. And at first they thought that, well, the reason why it was, there were, the black folks didn't really have a lot of myopathies. And we realized, no, it's not that. It's that they probably have more because of their diets. They just don't have a connection to the medical community. And then you find out, oh my God, there's a lot. So I think that if, for example, in an ideal world, if this institute would really reach out to, the Giants, the Jets, but there are a lot of people, maybe one or two, and all you need is one or two, who say, yeah, my mom died because of something. We never really did have this on, and you said, there's an institution that you could support us. I mean, we're just kind of talking.
Riffing.
But I think that in a concrete way, and again, I guess why I'm hammering on the idea that these things are more than teams.
Absolutely.
That the team is, but these represent economic interests and people who would be willing to work with you, provide not only the economics, but also the public relations. You know, because if the athletes say, well, this is the institution I'm supporting, this is why, a lot of people will follow. And you know, you have the sports ball. And I think it's wonderful when you have the sports ball, all the people, all the young people who are now, you know, going into the medical profession, who you support. You know, which I think that's kind of one of the things this is about. So I never know how to end my sentence.
Without a preposition.
Yeah, and look, I think that's the big challenge, right? How do you package healthcare issues in a engaging way that gets folks' attention, right? I think culturally and historically, you know, health issues and concerns in our communities have been conversations that nobody wants to have, or we have them far too late. So making those into engaging frontline conversations is difficult. And we've got to do some work around how we package that. I mean, it's clear we got a problem. We've known we had a problem. But we've got to figure out how we can make that, I say sexy, but how do you make that a conversation that folks want to engage in and talk about?
Who did we talk to? I forgot. We were having a conversation. Someone went to the school, and they wanted to have some students come. They took it to the athletic field, and she wants some of the athletes to come to I think be engaged in sort of they were having like a medical sort of like a preparatory thing, and she said it was like the last thing the athletes and it occurred to me, and this is another thing of Arthur, is that as much as I'll talk about sports, the way this sort of thing has come up has really drained so much enthusiasm to do other things, to be chemists or to be doctors. This whole sports thing has sucked so much energy out of it. And I think that's the biggest thing. How do you now, you know, because a lot of guys, you know, for every LeBron James, there are a lot of guys who could have been, or women, who could have been great surgeons or great business people, but this sports stuff has become so, at these big universities where a lot of people probably want to become not just football players, but historians or whatever, but they say, well, that's not why you're here. You're not here, University of Alabama, to be a historian. If you want to be a historian, you go to Howard. You're here to play big-time football or big-time basketball. And if you come into my office and talk about you want to be a history, you know, they're saying you're at the wrong school, you know. And I think that's the problem. And we talk about integration, and I went to Howard. I went to Morgan, I'm sorry. I went to Morgan. But the point is that invariably, if you went to an HBCU and you played football, you know, you kind of were a student athlete, but with this whole integration thing, you've got these really bright, potentially bright kids. You say, you're not coming here to do that. You're here to stay eligible, not to be a doctor, not to be a historian, not to be that. You're here to play ball. Here's a degree you get, okay? Be a communications major.
Right.
That's what we put on y'all. And then graduate, but it gets to the point of now when you have this need bending and all that, you've been through 2 or 3 or 4 years of college, but you've not been able to critically, you have to talk about critical thinking, so when it comes to these big moments, this is why we're kneeling. This is why we're doing this. This is why, well, because that's not how you've been programmed. You've been programmed to tote that barge, lift that bale, and help the coach make $10 million, and then when it's done, it's done. So I know this goes far beyond, you think about this stuff, it's like,
But again, that's another one of the initiatives that we've found in the Institute over the last 25 years, that Health Sciences Academy is wonderful. We've produced amazing people, but in order to get it right, we have to go further and further and further down the pipeline to younger and younger ages to give people options to do other things other than to be Harriet and I have got a 14-year-old granddaughter who happens to be extremely bright, gets great grades. She also happens to be nationally ranked as a softball player. She is being recruited at the age of 14. She's being tracked at Ivy League institutions, not for her intellect, which is substantial, but because of her sports prowess.
Yeah.
Now, if she didn't have the intellect, I mean, they would straight through. It boggles the mind.
Oh, I mean, again, this is not why we're here, but, I mean, the way they track our kids
Right.
is unbelievable. I mean, 11, if any of you had a kid who was, I mean, 9 years old, you know, this whole thing with the sneaker scandal, I mean, that's why I don't want to really get deep into that, but the reason I say that when the young ladies, well, I don't really follow sports, you have to. It's a $1 trillion industry that runs largely on our kids. Largely on our kids. And you have to understand how this kind of stuff works, because you could use it to the advantage of this institute or any other positive thing you're trying to get to. So.
We've got a few minutes left, so I wanted to hold to my promise and offer up if anyone has any questions from the audience.
This guy had his hand.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, gentlemen. That was fantastic. It was great to hear everything you had to say. Dr. Mandeville, I've been at Downstate for 25 years like you have, and it's always a privilege and a thrill to have you on campus, so thank you for coming. I like the idea of continually talking about health care, because that's really something that we can do about. We could really try to fix that. I mean, there's a lot of things out there. When you think about Arthur Ashe, all this stuff that's coming up now about women who had sexual harassment and abuse, I'm sure he would have been involved with that, but I don't know what we can do about that. I think we can definitely make changes in health care, and I think you've really inspired us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Be brave.
I'm Tan Tran. My issue is about the protesting. I'm a little cynical about my generation because we do protest, but it seems like it fizzles out really quickly. There's no objective leader because like we don't, right now from what I see, my friend in like a new Omega Psi, it's a frat in my Brooklyn College campus, they do a lot for the Afro-Caribbean population, but I don't see anything. I just see most of the protests just like stop after a couple weeks. And it makes me feel a little concerned about the future.
There's a Native American axiom that says, "We are the leaders we've been waiting for."
Oh.
Now, I do think there's a good point there, all right? You have to be able to sustain the pressure. You have to have, you know, even in business, I consult for a lot of businesses, and I go into companies, and the biggest issue with most companies that are challenged is they don't have a clear objective. Right. There's no finish line. They may have money as a goal, right? But they don't have a clear objective on what their mission statement is and how to get there, right? So with any protest, you need to have, what do you want to get out of it? What is the goal and the objective? And then you build the strategic and tactical plan to get to that objective, right? What they say, what most folks do now is, hey, our goal is to go out there and protest today. Okay, you go and protest it. What are you going to do tomorrow? Right. So you're just going to go out and protest the same thing you protested yesterday. You got to be moving toward an end goal. So I think, you know, one of the things that you can do when you go back to your organization is say, hey, guys, let's brainstorm about where we want to get. What do we want to get out of this? What's our goal? What's our mission? And then you have to kind of retroactively go back and figure out all of the steps to get there, right? And I think that was the issue with Colin Kaepernick. You know, he just sat down one day because he was pissed off, right, with police brutality and wanted to make a statement. And nobody came behind him to build the foundation of what that statement was really going to represent. And then it was hijacked by the president, which was taken in on a whole nother direction that it had nothing to do with.
And the mere fact that you are courageous enough to ask the question means that you're thinking about it. You don't have to lead. You keep thinking about it, keep talking to your friends about it, and it'll happen, my friend. But you got to just stay focused, as you're doing. And I'm really appreciative of the question.
You're in healthcare, so I'd imagine, to your point, I mean, everybody here, I'd imagine, is got a healthcare issue. I mean, that's your passion. And so you got to figure out, I remember, I hate to quote Condoleezza Wright, but she did say one thing. She said, when people know that you could hurt them, they'll leave you alone. And that's the essence of any type of, you can protest, though. When people know that you could hurt them, they'll leave you alone. So that whatever the nature of your protest is, there's protesting, and there's protesting that gets people's attention because it can hurt them. And you got to figure out, what's the pressure point? What's going to make them say, ouch? And you figure out what's going to make them say, ouch. Then you got to ask yourself, are you willing to say, ouch, too? Because people will push back.
Umberto.
Yes, thank you for sharing your reflections on Arthur, 25 years of the Institute. I just want to share, I think that the Institute represents a legacy that I'm happy that today we're discussing more, not only Arthur the star, the persona, sport persona, but a legacy of social justice that most young people starting to know what Arthur stood for. And in this country, we know history is not our best subject, right? So I just want to say that the Institute has that legacy in its practice, because sometimes we speak about justice, inequities. We respected Arthur because he practiced it. So our program reflects those values. The question about how we do it in healthcare, we are a good example of how do you practice that. By one, addressing the inequities in diversity in the health profession to make sure that those numbers change. The numbers remain the same in doctors and nurses, and we're investing our time in reaching out to bring a diverse community that represent America 21st century. So that's one of the legacy. The second legacy that we stand for is changing the dynamics of community engagement in health, where we don't see community only as something we research, but community as a participant in defining their health and taking ownership of also health management for the individual and the community. So we participate in that strongly. And lastly, that this partnership with the university is also to make sure that we're training a new professional that understand the complexity of those interconnection of race, racism, gender politics, and all the other factors that are fundamental in what we thought. I just end saying that I think Arthur was a visionary, and that Arthur expressed a society that he envisioned. And this discussion become relevant if we're talking about what is the America we see in the 21st century. I think that's the most important legacy, at least, we see from Arthur. He saw America that was still in evolution and had to include inclusion of all the new population, new type of identity, and to make sure that health and healthcare was a human rights and not just a commodity. So I think that's the tradition that we try to practice, at least some of us on the ground, from the Arthur experience. Thank you.
And one of the things that we see is, this is not, it's easy for us here in Brooklyn to talk about the racial aspect of it, but when I was the chair, one of my standard stump speeches was the fact that irrespective of how you feel about race, gender, all these other things, there's a practical approach to making this country better. And in healthcare, I'll give you some clear-cut examples. When HIV affected only a marginal community, the gay community, had we developed mechanisms to deal with it proactively, by the time it got to the rest of the population, it would have been a lot better. Had we dealt with the devastating effects of substance abuse, particularly heroin, when I trained at Harlem Hospital in the 60s and 70s, when it was a moral failing, now that it's become a disease in a different community, we'd be much farther along in managing it. So we're not just talking about women, black people, we're talking about trying to change health for the world. And I mean, I hate to sound Pollyannish, but if you look at it on a practical level, there are reasons that we are trying to do what we're trying to do. I hope I said it right. I don't know. That affect everybody and larger communities. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, last question, bro.
I wanted to take a moment to thank the three of you, because this is such an incredibly important dialogue, and just being able to get together, have these types of discussions, and who knows whose minds are being stimulated in this audience to be the next generation of leaders and thought leaders. So and I'm sure everyone here greatly appreciate you all's comments today. I just had a thought, because and Brett will appreciate this. I went to college in the late 80s, and in the late 80s, Coca-Cola was an incredibly popular product. It's not like today, oh, you know, you have to be healthy, don't drink Coca-Cola. Like back then, we drank a lot of Coca-Cola, ate a lot of hot dogs and hamburgers, et cetera. And Coca-Cola would not divest in South Africa. They openly refused to do it, despite inquiries and requests and, you know, whatever the political sentiment, they just said that they weren't going to do it. So we just decided we were not going to drink Coca-Cola. And all of us put our Coca-Cola needs to the side. And it had an incredible impact. It had a ballooning effect. There is a precedent that you can tackle huge multi-billion-dollar corporate entities and make them change their policies. By the top of the 90s, they had divested in South Africa. So it is possible. And we didn't have Facebook. We did not have Instagram. We just all made a decision all together to do it. So.
Thank you. Cool. So I think that's the end of our panel conversation. I'm looking at Marilyn like I was 5 minutes ago. We have a little video we're going to show, and then Marilyn's going to come up and conclude the program. So I want to thank you guys.
You want to be important? Wonderful. If you want to be recognized? Wonderful. If you want to be great? Wonderful. But recognize that he who is greatest among you shall be your servant.
Having grown up in a segregated environment in the South, I know what it's like to be stepped on. So I know what it's like also to see some black hero do well, you know, in the face of adversity.
Game, set, match to Miss Gibson.
That's a new definition of greatness. By giving that definition of greatness, it means that everybody can be great. Because everybody can serve.
Institutional culture was in turmoil, and athletes were a key part of that.
When you think about what's going on 400 years plus, the only thing that's changed is social media. The only thing that's changed is these things are actually captured now.
The kids in the ghetto, they need believable people to follow, to look up to. That is, if I don't really have any influence, well, they really don't have any heroes.
You don't have to make your subject and your verb agree to serve. You only need a heart full of grace. Soul generated by love. And you can be that servant.
you all for coming out. It's been a wonderful 25 years, although I've been there for 17 of them. And I look forward to a lot more. Today gave us an opportunity to reflect on all the things that have come before us, where we are right now, and to look forward to the future with great optimism. And so we look forward to another 25 years. I don't know if I'll be there for the next 25 years, but we do look forward to that. We gave you some packets, and in there we have the reflections from some of our board members, our former CEO, some of our staff, so I encourage you to take that with you. We also looked out to our community partners, and we thank you for being along the journey with us for the past 25 years, our salon stylists, our barbershops, our barbers, our schools, our liaisons, and we thank you so much for the journey, and we look forward to much more. As we depart, we have lunch across the street, so you'll have to have your coats, and you'll have to walk over there, but we have a wonderful lunch prepared for you. Remember to take our commemorative pen for our 25-year anniversary. Thank you so much for coming.